Today, in part 7 of my series about floats, I want to talk a bit more specifically about Avon floats. No one's quite sure where Avon floats got their name from, but the idea of taking a simple quill float based on a crowquill and putting a body on it, which would have been cork, is a very old one. And instead of a crowquill taking the equivalent of about 2 BB, you can make a much bigger float that takes, well, if you use a bigger quill, a goose quill or a swan quill, you can take something that takes sort of 6 swan shot, which in today's money is sort of, I don't know, 10 grams. So you can make a huge float. But the sort of Avon floats I like using take from about 5 BB up to the equivalent of about 12 BB, and more likely 8 BB to about 10 BB, which is sort of 3.5 grams up to 4.5 grams, something like that. Cork was the traditional material, and this is a lovely cork on quill float, quite small, only takes, I don't think it's actually, it's not marked, but it only takes about 5 BB. I did have a few of these made about 40 years ago by a Birmingham float maker and sold in Bournemouth because of the Birmingham connections of Bournemouth Fishing Lodge at the time with Ivor Britain. We've sort of moved on from cork, and with the popularity of balsa wood, most Avon floats are made with balsa bodies, dead easy to do. There's a balsa body there, and you see a lot of floats available commercially that basically take a bit of 3mm cane, balsa body, whip it up all fancy, Bob's your uncle. Very easy to make. And this old float, which is a bit more sophisticated, is under the old Ivan Marks brand, and it's 4AAA Ivan Marks, and it's actually got a tapered stem. I don't know if it's cane or just a hardwood, and it's got a thicker tip. I don't know whether that's balsa or not. It's got a bit chipped. What's interesting about this float is if you take a float that takes the same amount of shot that is made of, in this case it's got a styrofoam body. Styrofoam is this stuff that is used in building. Offcuts of this dead easy to find and work. Styrofoam is lighter than balsa. The crowquill is lighter than the cane. And I don't know if you can quite see that, but the blue float takes more shot than the black float, even though the body is quite a bit smaller than the one with the cane and balsa. So this float is physically heavier than this very, very light float. What that means, and I'll show you a little bit of footage now, is that when you cast, the float follows the weight. So quite often you'll have a bulk weight, which could be a bunch of BBs, or more, my preference nowadays is for tungsten olivettes if I can get them, with some droppers below that, and the float will follow the weight. A really light float will follow that weight better than a really heavy float. The heavy float has got its own casting weight. You don't really need that. You want the casting weight concentrated in the olivette. So that's the first thing really, is that making a float. This was another one of these Stan Bennett floats, 7 BB. It's got balsa body, crowquill, a little bit of whipping to tart it up a bit. It does strengthen it a little bit at the top and bottom of the body, but if you look after them, they shouldn't break. There was a guy who's still around, and I'm not going to mention him, who was buying these about 6 a week back in the late 80s. The supply was quite limited, and we grabbed what we could, and I've still got a few left. But this guy was forever breaking the bloody things. And I used to think, what a waste of good floats that were hard to get hold of. And I started to make my own in about 1988. A good starting point for making Avon floats is to get some crowquills. Whenever I'm on the riverbank, sometimes you'll get a bit with some big trees, a rookery, usually they're rook feathers. And I look out for these feathers, especially this time of year, which is August, when the birds are molting. I've noticed a couple of crows that live near me yesterday, and they're looking a little bit bedraggled, so they're obviously molting. A lot of the small birds are hiding away, the blackbirds and robins, because they don't like being seen as vulnerable and scruffy. So a crowquill and a balsa body, I won't attempt to put that on there, and you've got the basis for a nice crowquill Avon float. The amount showing, as you can see on this one, it's about 3/4 of an inch, probably about 5/8, just over half an inch on that one. For fishing close in, a bit of a shoulder and a crowquill. You can overshot it, hold it back. That's a standard trotting float for holding back. You will have heard of Topper Haskins, who I recently discovered was actually born in about 1940. He's no longer around, and he made a float that gained his name, known as a topper, for the Bristol Avon. And these are big floats. These are 10 to 14 BB, slim. There's no shoulder, and there's quite a long tip, about 1.25 inches. One of the big fishing shows once, I had lunch with him, and he went through this in very fine detail with me, why it was like that, why there was no shoulder. The idea was you underhand cast all the way across the Bristol Avon, and with the upstream wind, the weight would pull it through. And he said basically if the fish stops the bait, that thing will go under. Not too splashy a strike. You're not trying to hold it back. It's not a close-in float. It's for distance on a steady pull. If you want to hold back, you want that shoulder on a float. He made his floats. He'd moved from, I think, elder pith, don't say that when you're drunk, to balsa, and then eventually to styrofoam. And that float there is styrofoam, and that's more of a topper type float. It's incredibly light, and that really follows the weight, which was one of the advantages. The other thing about that Topper told me was that when that weight hits the river, the float's still up in the air, and you could give the rod a flick. So the float would go, instead of following it going outwards, so as it cocked, sort of pulling out towards the weight, it would get upstream of the weight. Bear in mind you've got an upstream wind, and then it would come down from upstream and settle, so you didn't lose any of the distance that you'd gained in casting. And because this float was so light, you could give that flick with sort of 25-30 yards of line out, and the float would flick over. So if it had been a heavy float like this, these don't really work as toppers. You catch fish on them, fish close in with them, but they're not a topper. So if you make them with cane and they've got weight, they're not the same. I did obtain from my mate over 30 years ago this special foam. I've made very few floats from it. That is one there. It's incredibly strong. You could squeeze it. There's barely anything. You do that to one with styrofoam, you just crush it, or elderpith, even balsa. Very easy to work. Where the hell you get hold of this, I do not know. You just cut it with a scalpel and then sand it. That's a partly made body. It's not done much with it, and it's a little bit heavier than styrofoam, but it's the strongest material ever known for float making. And nobody, and I mean nobody, people say, oh, they use rubber cell or something like that. It ain't this stuff. This stuff, 2-inch thick slabs. In 1992, when I got hold of this stuff, I had some little offcuts used in aircraft. Back then it was £2,000 a sheet, 8 foot by 4 foot sheet. That's not styrofoam prices, or whatever, roper cell, whatever this is. And this stuff's strong, don't get me wrong, but you could take a 1-inch cube of this stuff, put it on a very flat concrete floor and stand on it. It won't do it. Do that with styrofoam and it will just compress. It's very styrofoam strong, don't get me wrong. There's immense strength in it. The other difference with this stuff was that you can put cellulose thinners on this, or white spirit. It doesn't touch it. It doesn't even burn easily. If you put cellulose thinners or white spirit on this building foam, it will melt. So when you paint it, it's easy to work, very soft. You need to use a water-based acrylic paint for a couple of coats. Then you can put on a spirit-based paint if you want, like yacht varnish, stuff like that. We're nearly there on Avons. Like I say, keep it simple. There's two things that I've picked up in more recent years. One is I've started to use these Rizov float tips on wagglers. I cut a scoop out and take the top off and get very sensitive wagglers, or you can just leave it as it is with the rounded tip, insert that, incredibly bright. So I thought, why not put it into an Avon float? And this one's, it's only about a 3mm. This one's 3.5. Oh, that might be 2.5. And it makes a good, so you have a bit of crowquill at the base, nice and light. One of these hollow Rizov tips at the top, shaped differently to the sort of taper that you've got from a crowquill. Gentle taper is parallel and then rounded at the tip. And you can get these in, it's quite a thick tip there, if you want to make a really big Avon or whatever. But definitely worth a thought. They're long enough for any Avon float. So that's a variation, a modern variation. They're incredibly bright. They do colour up with use. It seems to get dirty. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I like these on wagglers, and I've used Avons with them as well. Most of the Avon floats in this, these are just spares. And there's another box, and there's loads of float cases with even more. I've got a few floats, and that's despite over 50 odd years when we used to have junior matches. I used to go through floats I'd bought and never used and give them away, and I still got scores and scores of floats, and I make them like everyone else for the hell of it. The one final thing I'm going to mention is, I don't know if you can see, this is a fluted Avon I made. It's just one piece of balsa. Back in the 50s or 60s, there was this idea that if you had flutes on a float, and Drennan are now selling fluted sticks, that it would somehow grip the water. Grip the water. Right. If you stick your hand into a bowl of water, try gripping it. There's no grip. If you try and move this through the water compared to a round float, yeah, there's a bit more resistance. It won't make a lot of difference going up and down. But when you're fishing an Avon float, especially one where you're trying to hold back, you want the water to flow round it. a bit, because the water at the surface is faster than the water down right on the bottom where your bait is. You want your bait going down at the speed of the water at the bottom, not the speed at the top. If the float's going through the speed at the top, it's sort of dragging through too fast, and quite often you want that bait just bumping along very slowly, giving the roach, which is normally what you're trying to catch, time to have a good look at it and to take it. I've got just about every decent book on match fishing ever published, and lots of back issues of Match Fishing and other fishing magazines, and no match angler has ever said you've got to have fluted floats. And there was such a fad for this. There were fluted antennas and duckers, and now we got fluted stick floats. The moment you try and hold that back, it goes flat. When you hold this back, it will just go round it. In fact, you can make a float with I don't think I've got one here. You can make floats that are like vanes, so it goes round, flows even better, like a hydrofoil type thing. People go to a lot of trouble of making these. They were made by, I think Belglow made them commercially, Avon floats, out of a harder wood, something like beech or a beachy or something. So it was less buoyant than, but this takes a lot of weight because there's a lot of float there. Around about 1970, I remember seeing them. I remember seeing someone using one successfully against an upstream wind, which is what Topper Haskins was sort of trying to do. But his belief was that he wanted the weight to pull through at the right speed, not the float to use the surface. And of course, when you get a strong upstream wind, the top bit can end up almost stopped and underneath it's going. So you want the float to pull through again, not get stuck with the flutes. So don't bother. Make one if you think, oh, this is pretty, but don't buy into this false idea that it's easier to mend the line and all the rest of it. Learn to float fish, get a longer rod, decent line that you can lift off the water, whatever. Use the skill, and not some faddy float. I even saw the idea someone made of a vaned float that would actually, as it trotted down, it would actually move outwards away from you, because obviously if you hold back an Avon float, slowly it's edging towards the bank. You don't want it really swinging round, but it is going to tend, where you start trotting and where you end up if you're holding back hard, that's even without a downstream wind, is tending to come into your own bank. And this idea that this float could move outwards, there's not enough force on it to really pull against all the drag of the line and all the rest of it. So it's a bit of a hopeful thing rather than an actual thing. Hope I've got you thinking about Avon floats. I've done a video previously on actually making one. They are simple. Keep the whippings to a minimum, and just make sure they're watertight. Happy float making. Till next time, it's goodbye for now.